Her breath was still caught between his lips when he looked at me. One hand curved around Myra's waist, the other reaching for me across the velvet throw. Lara's fingers pressed softly against his ribs, and Eden, silent and still, had her forehead resting against the curve of his neck like she was offering a prayer. And me? I didn't move. I simply watched him exhale, watched him stretch his hand across the firelit space between us. Not to pull me in, but to ask. And in that 1 second, with the room wrapped in heat and heartbeat, I gave him everything. I let go. I stood, and I stepped into it. Hello, viewers. Welcome to today's story. If you've been here before, welcome back. Give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe icon. It's the easiest way to show love, and we appreciate it more than you know. And if this is your first time here, you picked a good one. Go ahead, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a story. We drop them daily. Now tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now let's get into it. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We came for the quiet. A remote lodge tucked deep in the mountains, just me and him. Time away from noise, from deadlines, from pretending we weren't slowly becoming strangers in our own house. At least, that's what I believed when we arrived. Until I saw them. 3 women, smiling like they'd been waiting for him. He said it so easily. They're just colleagues. Work retreat. Last minute. And I nodded like a woman who trusts too fast, who loves too much, who's afraid to ask the question her body already knows the answer to. So I smiled. I unpacked. I played the role. But that night, I stopped playing. Now, standing at the edge of the room, the fireplace flickering like it knew a secret, I watched them. No one was in a rush. Not one sound was out of place. Myra's dress slipped off her shoulder like silk obeying gravity. Lara leaned into his chest, fingers teasing the buttons of his shirt with deliberate slowness. Eden, still wordless, was tracing something invisible onto his spine with her fingertip, each touch a whispered secret. They moved like memory. Like this wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I witnessed it. And still, I didn't stop it. I should have said something. Should have screamed. Should have left. Should have pulled him away and demanded to know who they really were to him. But I didn't, because something else happened instead. I felt still, present, like my body finally arrived where my soul had been standing, waiting, unsure of the rules. And instead of heartbreak, there was something else blooming inside me. Curiosity, longing, permission, not for him, but for me. His shirt was half open. One woman's lips on his collarbone, another on his wrist. Their eyes weren't hungry, they were reverent. And yet, he was still watching me. That was the part that undid me. He hadn't let go of me at all. Not emotionally, not energetically. He was waiting, holding space for me to step forward, or walk away. And the truth? I didn't want to walk. I wanted to feel what they were feeling. I wanted to know what it meant to surrender, without fear. So I crossed the room, slowly, not like a wife reclaiming her husband, but like a woman choosing herself, choosing everything. I touched his hand. Then I touched hers. Then the third. No one gasped. No one hesitated. They opened, made room, breathed me in like I had always belonged there. And when he pulled me in, gently, reverently, like a question answered, there was no more wondering. There was only warmth, skin, breath, and us. All of us. His hand was still wrapped around mine when I heard the soft clink of a wine glass beside us. Someone had poured another round, but no one was drinking. They were too busy breathing, too busy watching him, watching me. Mira was still curled close, her head resting just under his jaw, eyes half-lidded like she was floating between dreams. Lara's fingertips were drawing tiny circles on the inside of his arm, each touch a gentle claim. And Eden, quiet, focused, deliberate, was brushing strands of his hair back over and over, like she'd been waiting years just to touch him like that. And I was there, not outside it, not watching from a corner like I had been just hours earlier. I was part of it now, part of them. The fire hadn't lost its rhythm. Still crackling, still humming, still throwing shadows across the walls like dancers too shy to be seen in full light. He exhaled, and I felt it, not just on my skin, but in my spine. That breath held weight. Memory, maybe even guilt, or maybe just gratitude. For what I let happen, for what I didn't try to stop. Earlier, back at the table, I'd seen the shift begin. But it wasn't sudden. It was like steam rising from a glass of something too warm, too full. First slow, then certain, then impossible to ignore. I remember the way Mira asked him a question that didn't really matter. Something about projects. But the way she leaned forward, chin tilted, voice just low enough to pull his full attention, it was never about the words. It was the gaze. The way her fingers brushed her collarbone like she was trying to remember what his touch might feel like there. And he answered slowly, his voice thick. Careful. He knew. We all did. By the time we moved to the lounge, something had already shifted in the air. It wasn't tension anymore. It was permission. Unspoken but understood. I watched as Eden draped a blanket over the arm of the couch, smoothing it out like it mattered. Lara lit 2 more candles, and the room suddenly felt more like a shrine than a sitting room. It was sacred now, not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't being said. No one asked. No one apologized. No one looked confused. It was as if we'd all silently agreed that this was allowed to unfold. He sat centered on the couch, his shirt open but not undone, like a door cracked ajar, not forced. His hand rested with deliberate lightness on Myra's thigh. Her dress had gathered around her hips in soft, surrendering folds, silk giving way to gravity's gentle insistence. And Lara was curled beside him on the floor, her hand now resting just above his knee, eyes watching his face as if it held the answers to something achingly personal. And then there was Eden. She hadn't touched him. Not fully. Not yet. But her gaze never abandoned him. She was mapping every detail with her eyes, every scar, every subtle twitch in his jaw, every pulse of restraint thrumming just beneath his skin. She was reading him like a page she'd waited far too long to turn. And me? I was seated across from them, tucked into the other couch like I'd always belonged there. My feet were bare now. My dress had loosened at the back, fabric whispering against my skin. And my chest felt warm. Not from the wine, but from the way he kept looking at me. Even as Mira leaned closer. Even as Lara's hand crept incrementally higher. Even as Eden tilted forward ever so slightly, like gravity had abandoned all pretense. His eyes kept returning to mine. Checking. Asking. Needing. And I gave him the smallest nod again. Because I did understand. I did feel it too. And even though I had no words for what this was becoming, I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't betrayal. Not anymore. It was belonging. Mira moved first. Not with hunger, but with grace incarnate. She rose up on her knees, straddling his lap with the careful slowness of someone memorizing a sacred prayer. Her fingers found his jaw, and when she kissed him, it wasn't wild. It was reverent, like she was offering gratitude. He kissed her back, his hand wrapping around her waist, and a hush descended over the room so profound it almost echoed in the silence. Lara looked up at me then. Her eyes weren't smug or daring. They were soft, inviting. She didn't ask with words, but her expression whispered, "Are you still with us?" And I was. God, I was. Eden finally moved. Just one palm placed with infinite gentleness against the back of his neck. Her touch was barely there, featherlight. But he leaned into it, closed his eyes, let her in. It was then that I realized they weren't stealing anything from me. They were giving him something I hadn't known how to offer in a long, long time. tenderness, acceptance, space to unravel completely. And maybe I needed that too. I stood, not because I felt compelled, but because it no longer made sense to remain apart. My legs carried me forward like they'd been waiting all night to cross that short, impossible distance. I stepped around Mira, brushed past Lara's shoulder, let my fingers graze Eden's back as I circled behind the couch. And then I knelt, right in front of him, right in front of them all. He looked down at me like I was something infinitely delicate. But I didn't want delicacy anymore. I wanted truth. So I reached for his hand again, held it between both of mine. And in that crystalline stillness, something broke open. Not in pain, in peace. There were no moans, no cries, just the gentle crackle of the fire, the whispered hush of breath, the slow exhale of four souls collapsing into each other with nothing left to conceal. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just moved. Together, in perfect rhythm, like waves folding into each other, over and over, never trying to break the shore. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt chosen. And just before I closed my eyes, I realized something that made my chest ache in the gentlest way. He wasn't the only one I'd come here for. His fingers were still threaded with mine when she lowered herself over him. Mira didn't move quickly. Nothing about her ever did. She was fluid and graceful, her hips settling in his lap like she'd always belonged there, like her body already knew where to land and how to ask for more without ever uttering a word. Her head dropped to his shoulder, and for a moment, everything in the room felt impossibly, beautifully still. No rush, no guilt, no questions, just breath, and the slow, exquisite unraveling of something we had all held back for far too long. Lara was kneeling beside him now, her hand still resting on his thigh, her other brushing lightly across the base of his spine. She wasn't looking at him directly, her eyes were on me, watching me, studying me, not to provoke, but to ask permission. And when I didn't flinch, when I let my gaze fall softly over the curve of Myra's back and the way his hands held her like something both fragile and precious, Lara gave the faintest smile. A soft, feminine kind of approval. The kind that says you're still here. You still belong. Behind him, Eden had moved closer. Her knees pressed into the couch cushion as she leaned in, her chest brushing against his back, her breath close to his ear. Still, she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was her native language. She was worshiping him in stillness, while her fingers ghosted over his collarbone like she was afraid touching him too fully might wake her from something she wasn't ready to abandon. And he was holding all of it. Not in dominance, not in ego, but with the kind of presence you only develop after losing too much, waiting too long, or loving too deeply to ever take connection for granted again. His body was surrounded, yes, but his mind, his heart, they remained with me. Every time Mira released a soft sigh, every time Lara's lips grazed his shoulder, every time Eden's breath trembled near his neck, he still found me. His eyes kept finding me, not pleading, not apologizing, just anchoring, like he needed me to know I hadn't been replaced. I was still the center of this room, even if I was the only one still fully clothed. I didn't know what this meant, not in practical terms. There were no labels for this exquisite complexity, no words I could offer myself to make it easier to explain later. And yet, I didn't need explanation. I didn't even need clarity. What I needed was this feeling, the feeling of being wanted, seen, included. Even in silence. Especially in silence. Mira arched slightly, her fingers digging into his shoulders, not in desperation but in pure devotion. Lara's palm slid upward, resting flat over his heart. Eden kissed the space just beneath his ear, her mouth moving slowly, reverently. And him? He tilted his head back. Eyes closed, mouth parted, chest rising in slow, steady waves, like he was floating on some invisible current. Like he had surrendered, completely. And still his hand held mine. Tighter now, as if the deeper he fell into them, the more he wanted me close enough to fall with him. It was then I understood. This wasn't about him needing more. It was about him needing all. And somehow, inexplicably, so did I. I moved closer, barely a shift, just enough to close the space between the couch and where I knelt. His knee brushed against mine, a whisper of contact that sent electricity through my skin. His other hand reached down, slow and unhurried, fingers sliding gently along my forearm, coaxing me into the warmth like he knew I wasn't sure how far I was allowed to go. And again, he didn't pull. He waited for me to choose. Waited for me to step in, not out of duty, not out of fear of losing him, but because I wanted to. Because I wanted them. And I did. I let my hand rise. Let my fingertips graze Myra's spine, just lightly enough to feel the soft ridge of her tension melt beneath my touch. She turned her head toward me, not startled, not uncertain, and her eyes met mine with something that nearly stopped my breath. Gratitude. Acceptance. Relief. Lara reached for me then. Her fingers slid over my knee, delicate, tentative, like she was asking, "Are you okay?" Without words. I nodded, and she leaned in closer, resting her head against my leg, her body exhaling against me like I was part of the structure holding her upright. And then Eden. Eden leaned further around, and for the first time since all of this began, she looked at me fully. Her eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with reverence. She reached for my hand, the one that had lingered too long without being touched, and she brought it gently to her cheek. Pressed it there. Held it, as if I was the only softness she'd felt in years. I closed my eyes, and in that moment I let go. Of every question, every rule, every version of myself that thought love had to look a certain way to be real. We were quiet, so quiet. Only the fire spoke now, its soft crackle the score beneath this tangle of skin and trust and breath. There were no names being called, no sounds you couldn't say aloud, just murmurs, just fingers tracing paths, just mouths brushing against shoulders. And him, still holding me, still watching me, still breathing me in like I was the calm center of a storm he didn't want to survive unless I came with him. Time stopped meaning anything. There was no hour, no moment to measure, only the pulse of togetherness. The way bodies found each other naturally, like rivers joining the sea, without map, without permission, only direction. At some point, Mira rested her head on my shoulder. Lara curled up on the rug, her cheek against my thigh. Eden laid back against him, eyes closed, hand in mine. And him? He pulled me to his chest, held me like I was the first chapter and the final page. And I let him, because for the first time I believed it. I don't know when the fire burned low. At some point, it had stopped crackling. The light on the walls no longer flickered, just hummed with that golden orange warmth that feels like early morning even when it's still deep into the night. Lara's arm was slung across my legs, her lips barely parted in sleep. Mira had folded herself in toward the couch, one hand still touching his chest like she needed to feel him breathing before she could let herself drift. And Eden was draped across him, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen before, almost weightless. But he wasn't asleep. Not even close. His fingers were tracing slow circles on the inside of my wrist. Over and over. Like he was memorizing something. Something about the shape of me. Or the way my pulse stayed steady under his touch. Or maybe just how quiet I became when I let myself be wanted without fear. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't trying to start again. He just wanted to stay awake in the softness of the moment. With me. I tilted my head, just enough to look at him. He was leaning back, shirt half undone, hair a little wild from all the hands that had passed through it, mouth curved in the faintest, sleep-drunk smile. But his eyes were clear. Present. Still holding the weight of everything that had happened, Every touch, every glance, every moment where silence had said more than speech ever could. And when he met my gaze, something in him softened further. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But he didn't look away either. It was the kind of stillness that makes you realize just how loud everything else has been. I shifted, slow and careful, not to wake the others. He moved with me, barely, just angling his body enough to give me space. I settled in beside him, shoulder to shoulder now, my thigh pressed against his. Not needing words. Not wanting to break whatever this was. We stared at the fire for a while, just breathing, just being. And then he spoke. "You didn't pull away," he said, voice low like he didn't want to wake the night. I looked over at him. "Neither did you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, not out of sadness, more like reverence. The way someone smiles at a painting they don't know how to describe, but can't stop looking at. "You could have left," he added, barely above a whisper. I let that settle. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to feel the truth of it before I gave it words. I didn't want to. His hand found mine again, not squeezing, not even holding, just resting. Like he knew I might need to decide for myself whether to keep it there. I did. I turned my palm upward, laced my fingers through his. And just like that, his shoulders dropped. Like he'd been waiting for permission. Not to touch me, but to trust that I wasn't slipping away now that the moment had passed. "I saw you," he murmured. The fire flickered again. Or maybe I imagined it. "I kept seeing you, even while everything else was happening." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I did. There was something fragile about hearing him admit it. Like naming it too loudly might shatter the magic we were standing in. Like what we were holding between us was too sacred for daylight words. I leaned my head on his shoulder, slow and quiet, like a prayer. He turned his head slightly toward me. Didn't kiss me. Didn't even brush his lips against my skin. He just rested there, breathing with me. And suddenly I realized this was the real intimacy. Not the ache. Not the heat. Not the wild, messy beauty of passion. But this. The ache after. The way two people stay connected when everything else has gone still. How quiet it is. When no one's proving anything anymore. The clock on the wall ticked once. I felt Lara shift beside me, murmuring something unintelligible in sleep. Mira curled in tighter. Eden sighed. And still he didn't move. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I needed to be strong, or composed, or perfectly contained. I just needed this, the shoulder, the silence, the slow rhythm of fingers brushing the back of my hand. It didn't matter what it meant yet. Didn't matter where it would lead. What mattered was that we were still here, still tethered, still saying something with our bodies that language always seemed to complicate. He turned to me again, this time slower. This time more deliberate. And when his forehead met mine, he exhaled, not a sigh, not longing. Just release. The kind that whispers, "I've waited so long to feel safe inside someone again." I breathed with him and said nothing, because I didn't need to say anything. We were already speaking. The first thing I felt was warmth. Not heat. Not fire. Just that low, steady kind of warmth that seeps into your skin and settles there like a secret you've finally learned to keep. It wasn't coming from the fireplace, now just quiet ash and faint orange ghosts. It was coming from bodies. Still asleep, still tangled, still here. I opened my eyes slowly, not from grogginess, but because I didn't want to disturb the stillness we had earned. Sunlight was just beginning to stretch across the floor, soft and forgiving. I could see motes of dust dancing in the golden haze, catching the light like tiny confessions. Time hadn't restarted yet. Reality hadn't knocked. And for a moment, it felt like we were still suspended in between, floating in that sacred space where nothing had to be explained or justified or named. His arm was still around me. Not heavy, just there. And when I turned slightly to see him, he was already awake, looking at me like he had been for a while. Not staring, just witnessing. "You didn't leave," he whispered, voice still thick with mourning. "I didn't want to." He smiled then, lazy, genuine, unguarded. The kind of smile that only happens when someone forgets they're being watched. I could feel Myra's legs still pressed lightly against mine. Lara's hair was splayed out like a soft curtain across the pillow behind me. And Eden had shifted during the night, her fingers now resting gently near my ankle as if she'd unconsciously anchored herself there in sleep. We were still connected, still folded into one another like a story we hadn't finished reading. And oddly, none of it felt confusing. None of it felt strange. There were no apologies hanging in the air. No tension. No sharp inhale waiting to break the spell. Just quiet awareness, the kind that hums underneath your skin when you know something real has happened, even if you don't yet know how to name it. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. Slowly, carefully, like maybe it was sacred now, this face, this skin, this space we'd shared. "Do you regret it?" he asked. His voice didn't shake, but something in his eyes did. I looked at him longer than I probably needed to, just to be sure. "No." He exhaled then, like he'd been holding that breath since the night before. "I don't either," he said. And the way he said it, it wasn't casual. It wasn't just relief. It was reverence. Like he'd been afraid the morning might erase the night, but it hadn't. If anything, it made everything more real. The others began to stir one by one. Mira first, stretching like a cat, blinking softly as she took in the room again. Then Lara, her eyes half closed, murmuring something drowsy about the fire going out. And finally Eden, who sat up slowly and looked around at all of us, then smiled. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. That look in her eyes said it all. We're still here. We still mean it. I sat up, pulling the blanket with me, suddenly aware that we had crossed into a different part of the story. The part where morning asks you what you really want, and who you're willing to stay for, and maybe what you're no longer afraid of. He stood slowly, offered his hand like it was an invitation, not an expectation. I took it. He led me toward the kitchen, barefoot and gentle, not letting go even once. "I was going to make coffee," he said quietly, like we were keeping the world outside from hearing us. "I was going to stay right here," I said back, matching his smile. We moved like we'd done this before, like our bodies had already learned the choreography and were just waiting for us to catch up. He handed me a mug. I held it with both hands, the warmth of it somehow pale compared to the warmth I felt from him standing beside me in that sunlit silence. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," he said, without looking at me. And it wasn't desperation. It wasn't pressure. It was truth, soft, honest, brave. I turned to him. "I don't either." He looked up then, really looked. And for a second, it felt like the kitchen disappeared. The world narrowed to 2 mugs, a shared gaze, and a morning that didn't feel like the end of something, but the beginning. We heard a laugh from the living room, Mira teasing Eden about snoring. Someone put on music low from their phone, soft acoustic, something nostalgic. And in the quiet joy of it all, I leaned against the counter, sipped my coffee, and let the comfort sink in. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing. Because even though I didn't know what happened next, I knew this. Whatever it was, I didn't have to go through it alone. We didn't leave that morning. No one rushed out the door. No one started folding clothes or reaching for phones like they were trying to escape the quiet. We stayed slowly, softly together. The air was still a little warm from the fire the night before. And even though the flames had died down, something inside me hadn't. It was still flickering, still alive, still asking me to pay attention. We spent most of the morning barefoot, padding around the kitchen, passing mugs, brushing past each other like it was muscle memory now. There were sleepy smiles, low voices, familiar touches that didn't ask for permission anymore, but never took it for granted either. Someone found eggs. Mira cracked them like a pro, humming something old and sweet under her breath. Lara stood barefoot at the window, staring out at the woods, arms folded, eyes soft with something close to peace. Eden leaned against the counter, stealing bits of toast and glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. And him. He was just there, leaning against the doorframe, watching me like the answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. I caught his gaze once, held it longer than I should have, and instead of looking away, I just let him see me. Sleep hair, no makeup, the faded curve of yesterday still lingering in the corner of my mouth. I didn't hide, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to. After breakfast, the girls sat on the living room rug, legs crossed, talking about things that didn't feel heavy, like they trusted that the deep had already been said, and the rest was just life. Ordinary, quiet, slow-moving life. And somehow, I wanted in. I wanted all of it. The mess. The mornings. The way his shirt smelled when he handed it to me, like cedar and something unmistakably him. We ended up outside, sunlight stretching through the trees. No plan, no pressure. Just silence and skin and slow, shared warmth. I sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to my chest, sipping the last of my coffee as he settled beside me. He didn't speak for a while. Just breathed. Just was. And somehow, that was louder than anything. Then he looked at me, not dramatic, not with any grand speech. Just honest. "You seem quieter today," he said gently. I nodded. "I feel full." He tilted his head, studying me with that look that didn't ask for more than I wanted to give. "What kind of full?" I paused, then looked back toward the cabin, where laughter still echoed from inside. The kind that's not looking for anything to fill it anymore. His smile appeared slowly, fractured at the edges, yet luminous with possibility. I was terrified the morning would steal this from us. The words settled in the space between heartbeats. I couldn't answer immediately because honesty demanded acknowledgement. Part of me had harbored that same fear. But instead of surrendering to flight, I had chosen to remain. And in that choice, something fundamental shifted within me. The touch was soft, intentional, not a declaration or desperate grasp for permanence, but an act of reverence, to honor what had transpired, to etch it into memory, to breathe life into something gossamer fragile, yet undeniably real. In that crystalline silence, where the world had graciously retreated to grant us sanctuary, a revelation bloomed. This wasn't merely a night surrendered to passion or loneliness banished by temporary companionship. This was choice, deliberate, mutual, transformative. I had chosen them, and in the mysterious alchemy of connection, they had chosen me in return. When departure finally beckoned, no one dared voice the inevitable question that hovers after intimacy. What does this mean? No one demanded definitions or extracted promises like blood from stone. But when his lips found mine beside the weathered door, when Myra's fingers lingered against my palm with that extra beat of connection, when Eden's whisper, "We'll see you again, won't we?" sent shivers down my spine. When Lara simply smiled with the knowing expression of someone who recognizes truth before it's spoken, I understood with startling clarity. This meant something. Perhaps not something easily categorized or defined by conventional terms, but something authentic and undeniable. As I settled behind the wheel and glanced back at the cabin, still bathed in honeyed sunlight, I felt no sense of loss or abandonment, because something essential in me had taken root in that sacred space. Something precious of theirs had woven itself into my being. The exchange was complete, the transformation irreversible. Some stories don't end. They simply begin again, deeper and more luminous than before. If this tale has stirred something within you, share it with those who understand that love rarely arrives in simple packages. Subscribe to witness more stories where hearts collide and souls recognize their missing pieces. Because the most beautiful chapters are yet to be written. and you won't want to miss what comes next.